all of this acceleration of state power at the expense of our civil liberties and our human rights and our dignity as individuals is happening in direct response to the fact that at its fundamental level they're losing control, and they're more and more worried about maintaining order, maintaining the status quo, maintaining business as usual. Rather than dealing with the real causes, all they're doing is dealing with symptoms, while things actually will continue to get worse because the systemic causes of this crisis convergence are still there.
I never did anything bad. Honest. Look at yourself real close.
What I'm seeing really is that a lot of the mainstream conventional thinking is not self-reflective enough. There isn't enough capacity to look at what we have done wrong. What have we done as our societies that isn't working, that needs to change? There's not enough willingness to accept that maybe the path that we've gone on hasn't been optimal, hasn't been the best way for humanity ever.
Welcome to the world of tomorrow. Climb aboard. You are about to take a journey out of this world into the world of the future. Forget the world around you. Forget the people around you. You are entering Futurama, alone with your own thoughts.
These crises really, in a way, are symptoms of a process of transition to another form of civilization, another form of social, political, and economic and cultural organization. I think the urgent question that we need to be asking ourselves is what comes after? What is the post-carbon, post-peak world going to look like? And that is really up to us. It's pretty clear that we cannot continue growing on a single planet endlessly. What this means is that if we are going to overcome these crises, we need to rethink our whole understanding of the human condition and our relationship to our environment and our relationship to one another, and that we need to move away from some of these prevailing ideas and values that have dominated our current drive towards unlimited material growth, which is being driven by these consumerist values to do with the idea that human well-being is linked to increasing consumption of material products and increasing acquisition of material goods. So do we need to ditch the whole concept of growth? Well, I do think that we need to reject the material concept of unlimited economic growth. But we can still retain the idea of social progress, that there is some kind of moving forward, but we need to redefine what we mean by moving forwards, by getting better, by advancing. And rather than defining this in material terms, in terms of material production and consumption, we need to be defining it in terms of meeting people's basic needs, recognizing that any kind of material progress that we might make in and of itself means nothing if it doesn't cater for these more fundamental goals that all of us hold to be so important. Things like having clean water, education, literacy, things like spiritual fulfillment, things like community, family, things like well-being. There may be some material components to that, but what we find then is that the material conditions of life, rather than being the fundamental goal, rather those are simply tools to achieve these much more important values.
Jimmy. Don't be frightened. We are your friends.
We need to accept that the overabundance of fossil fuels has been linked to the ability to continue on this path of unlimited growth. There are many viable alternatives to fossil fuels. There is solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy. As we've discussed, scaling up this process of transitioning to renewable energy infrastructure wouldn't be feasible. So we need to be recognizing that there should be more localization, there needs to be much less consumption of natural resources, that we need to be lowering our footprint on the earth. Renewable energy alternatives do not allow us to continue business as usual. What they allow us to do is to contract our societies to a form which is much more sustainable and much more in parity with the environment and the earth.
Out of the slime and darkness it comes to inflict its life-destroying poison on the careless, the unwary, the unprotected. No sane person would deliberately expose himself to its venom. No intelligent person would venture within striking distance of its fangs. Yet today, young people are flirting with a poison every bit as deadly as that of the snake.
I think certainly the way forward for looking at the banks is, at a minimum, we want to see a fundamental separation of the activities of the financial sector, where banks are investing and speculating on stock markets and shares and so on and so forth, and we have this fictional financial whirlwind going on. Separate that out from basic retail banking, where a person goes to the bank, deposits their money for safekeeping, and goes away. They want to know that their money is their money and that banks aren't going to be playing around with that and that it's going to be in jeopardy. That's one thing. On the other hand, we need to completely rethink the way money is created in the first place by banks. We need to accept that interest hasn't worked. It's actually generated and fundamentally created this whirlwind of unrepayable debt, which leads to cyclical economic failures. We need to be looking at the entire way that banks are structured and that money is created, and to start thinking about fundamental alternatives that communities can start engaging in now. What we're talking about is creating new forms of currency, new forms of exchange, and making them much more in parity with the real world. One of the most significant key structural problems is the fact that the vast majority of the world's population lives in a state of dispossession. By dispossession, I mean that they do not have access or ownership or use rights for land, resources, raw materials. This condition is one of the key causes that has generated a lot of the most regressive dynamics of capitalism in its current form. So it's essential that we challenge this condition of dispossession fundamentally. Communities are going to have access to land to produce food. If they don't, then they're not going to be able to eat because supply chains are going to be damaged as a result of peak oil. Fossil fuels will not be providing food in the way that we were able to do so in the past. Industrial agriculture is failing. So in the post-peak world, we need to be exploring new forms of social organization that allow communities to open up access to land, to resources, to the commons.
And certainly we need to have a dialogue about how this happens. I'm not saying that I have a simple answer or a blueprint for the way forward, but this is something that needs to emerge organically from communities themselves. It's important to recognize that existing institutions and structures are more than likely to doggedly pursue their own vested interests, even as this accelerates global crises. But this just means that it's absolutely essential for us as communities to become much more resilient to these shocks. We're going to have to become much more localized, participatory, and grassroots in how we do things like food, energy, and the economy. And this is going to be essential for us not just to prosper, but to survive.